Well, g'day T. Here we are, episode 20, the big 20.
Yes, 20, the ultimate episode. I was watching TV the other day and someone who worked for the Oxford English Dictionary was saying that the word ultimate does not mean the best, it means the last. So we are in the ultimate episode of season 1.
I guess we're just going to today touch on those Q&As that people have been sending in. But before we do that, I guess we just want to remind people, there's a lot of people you're feeding back that they're enjoying the podcast, that there's certainly a lot more engagement with the podcast, and it's obviously hitting home with some people. Rate us, review us on your favourite podcast platform, put us out there, retweet us, share us on Facebook, whatever. We just want to build the community of people coming together to talk. And no, Anthony Ben Brown, it is not a congregation. It is not a ministry. We just want to build a community.
The other thing to remember is Redbubble. I know it may sound a little bit pretentious, but we do have merch, and that's just, ways for you to get the brand out for us and people find out about us. You're drinking from your coffee cup or wearing your hoodie or whatever it is you're doing. So look for us on redbubble.com. Any money that we make from that goes back into the running of the podcast as well.
Yeah, and for those who say, well, what do you need money? Well, every time we do a little bit of an advertising campaign on Facebook, it costs us money. And, the last one that we did proved to be relatively successful in getting a few more people involved in the conversation. Some of you who are listening now might be a product of that.
Yeah, so don't feel obliged. 100% this is free. We do it as a labour of love, but if you wanted to support us, that's how you do it. The other thing too is the Facebook group. It's still going brilliantly. We've got, over 150 people, a member of that, and people are chatting, and you can come along and just lurk. You don't have to engage, but you can see what other people are saying. So we invite you to be a part of that, and also invite you to follow us on Twitter. But I've got a question for you, B. What was your favourite episode so far?
I think it was the series of episodes actually with Anthony Ben Brown. I love reading a biography, and listening to someone's story and their journey is always a highlight for me. So those episodes, I think it was 11, 12 and 13 perhaps, were really interesting, and I really enjoyed those chats with Anthony. And also where, exploring where he's come from, where he is going to, where he is now, all that sort of stuff I think is interesting, because that's the sort of thing that we're trying to unpack, I guess, through this series. How about you, T?
Yeah, well, just reflecting on the AVB stuff, he definitely has a story, and yes, he was a teenage fundamentalist, but I think what's really interesting about him is not just the LGBTQ factor, but also the fact that he was such a high-profile leader. And I think that was what made that one really interesting and really impacting. But no, mine was the speaking in tongues one. Oh, I loved it.
No surprise.
Yeah, I just laughed, man, when we were making it. And also I've listened to it a few times and I got to laugh out loud. The innuendo was unintended. We were not going in there going, let's make cunnilingus jokes as much as we can. Not at all, but we just did. And I loved it.
Yeah, we do like to have a little bit of a laugh along the way, and we don't have script writers for our jokes and our fun and our puns.
I think that's obvious, B. I think that's obvious that we don't have script writers.
Oh no, I was just pointing that out. Yes, you're right. But next season we may be employing script writers. Who knows?
The other one that stood out to me as impactful upon me was the Tea Leaves the Revival Centre. That one, yep. I didn't realise how much that was going to actually impact me. I thought I was past a lot of that stuff. I genuinely thought, the Revival Centre, left that behind a long time ago. AOG, different kettle of fish, but the Revival Centre. But mate, I was genuinely upset and unsettled for a good couple of weeks after we recorded that. And I think going back and listening to it a few times didn't help. But I really thought I was past that, but obviously not.
Yeah, and I think we reflected as we were recording that one. You could see how visibly upset and shaken you were by even talking about it. And I think there's a lot of shit coming up for you. But I think the whole series, it's been interesting. I'm the same. I thought, I'm okay. I can chat about this stuff. And it's dredged up things that I didn't know were there that are still there. I mean, it certainly hasn't dealt with it, but it's good to chat about it. And get it out there a bit. So, and I think that's what people are resonating with on the Facebook group as well. They often talk about hey, this is helping in being able to normalize the abnormal.
Yeah, agreed. And I think one of the things that the whole positive psychology movement has shown us is we don't need to live there. Like the whole, I don't think it's called negative psychology, but you know what I mean. The traditional psychology thing was, we go back, we unpack it, and then we just keep unpacking it and keep unpacking it. And positive psychology says, no, we unpack it, we process it, we put it away, and then we move on. It's one thing to go back and revisit and have a bit of a laugh and even make a podcast. It's another thing to stay there all week or all the time. I realize that people are at a different point in this process and not everybody has the same experience. But I think it's really important to not stay in the negative any longer than you need to. And I want to stress, I know that there's times to be there and there's a need to be there, but we don't want to stay there forever.
No, it's not a healthy or a happy place. And you can overanalyze. And I think that you've just got to deal with it. You've got to move on best you can and find your support networks that can help you do that. I think that's a really important thing.
Finding that balance between leaving or moving on too early or moving on too slowly, I don't have the answer to that. I really don't. But I do think that there is a middle ground where we process it, we put it away, we move on. But then having done that, coming back with a positive attitude towards it and reflecting on it in that way, I think can be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone at their own pace, no doubt. Lots of downloads. I think T, you posted during the week that we hit our 5,000 mark last weekend.
I remember when we got excited at 50, and now we're doing that a day.
I got excited when there was one until I realised that one was probably me listening to our first episode. But, that's okay.
Look, mate, I think we should jump into these questions. How do you feel?
I think that would be good. And I guess just before we do jump in, thank you for everybody for sending them in. We've got quite a few. And there's some great questions in here and some ones that have, involved us having to dig a little bit deeper and think about how we're going to respond.
So how about I fire the first one?
Why not?
This is from Anna on Facebook. And she says, do you think our experiences are unique to the context of the 80s and 90s, or do you think teenagers today in fundamentalist churches in Australia are experiencing the same culture, behaviours, beliefs and pressures?
Yeah, good question. I really don't know any teenagers in the fundy scene at the moment because a lot of my friends, and I imagine your friends too, T, the kids are getting a bit older, so they're not really in that fundy scene anymore. But I would imagine it's similar. I mean, there's different pressures, different societal pressures. There's a lot of, you hear quite often from evangelical circles, pushback on some of the progressive policy of government. And I'd imagine that within that space, there would be a pushback on that progressive policy. So I don't know. What do you think about it?
Yeah, look, I think it would be very, very similar. Of course, there's going to be differences. We're talking 20, 30 years later, but I do think it's very similar. The scene has changed somewhat because you've got the whole Hillsong thing and you've got, Justin Bieber and, Hailey Bieber and Chris Pratt and people like that involved in it now. I mean, we used to get excited at, Tommy Emmanuel and that jockey, what was his name? Darren Beedman.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, we used to get excited at them. And now these guys have got Hollywood superstars and pop stars and this kind of thing involved in the scene. And even, I don't know if you remember, but Guy Sebastian from the Australian Idol, I think he's since left. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he has. Yeah, he has. It just sort of exploded with a lot of this sort of famous people. It's almost like Scientology. So I think that there are definitely differences in terms of the sheer size and the sheer scale. But I also think that a lot of it is the same because I don't see a lot of evolution in terms of doctrine. I don't see a lot of evolution in terms of position around social issues and that kind of thing. So I would think it would be the same. But like you, I'll throw the caveat in there and say, ultimately, I don't know.
No, I mean, one thing I do know is I can think of two friends off the top of my head, which at my age is good, it's better than one, that go to Pentecostal churches now. And I think they act quite differently in that scene when they're mixing with those people than they do when they're with me. And I've seen some of the evidence of that through social media and some of the things they post, and then some of the interactions we have when we hang out. So I think there's still definitely a pressure. I mean, these people are in their 40s and perhaps even early 50s. But I think that there is those pressures on that age. So undoubtedly, there would be similar pressures on teenagers.
Question number 2, and this is for you. Isaac from Facebook says, is the congregational church model biblical?
Well, Isaac, I actually don't know whether it's biblical, but I think the congregational model of anything is quite a positive thing, as long as it's not exclusive, as long as it doesn't block other people out, because the reality is I think that we are a communal people as humans. We don't do well in isolation generally. Some people love isolation, but definitely that coming together in the congregation. I like to catch up with mates at a pub. Some people might like to catch up with people at church. But again, it's about that congregational feeling, and whether people are doing that for any positive outcome, then I'm okay with that. As long as it's not damaging, as long as it's not exclusive, and as long as it's not a cult.
I don't want to alienate Isaac with asking this question because, we say, please, everyone's welcome, etc. But I just want to say, Isaac, my response to that is I don't know and I don't care. But it doesn't mean I don't know and don't care about you, Isaac. You're probably awesome. But I don't care, because for me the trigger word there was biblical. Is it biblical? I don't know, probably, but everything's biblical. Having penis like donkeys, apparently in the Old Testament, that is biblical. Having giants that ran around and slept with the daughters of men, or whatever, or the angels sleeping with the daughters of men and making giants and all that's biblical. Worldwide floods are biblical. So I don't use that as a measure of whether something is, useful or true or anything like that anymore. So, resonating with what you said, B, I do think that the less of a clergy and more of a laity sort of approach is a good thing around spirituality. Yep. So in that sense, I would say it's a valid question. Yep. Is the congregational model versus a Presbyterian model better? Yes. But is it biblical? I don't know and I don't care.
Yeah, and I think you missed the second half of that scripture. Wasn't it appendage of donkeys and emissions of that of a horse or something like that?
Possibly.
We used to quote that one quite often because it was like, chuckle. But yeah, very childish.
My favourite one was, and I used to tell people it was my favourite scripture, and I can't remember the reference anymore, but it was the one in the King James where they sit on the wall and eat their own dung and drink their own piss. It said piss, and it was like, because you couldn't say piss in church. You couldn't say piss off, and yet the Bible says piss.
Does it say pisseth?
Pisseth? No, there was piss. Yeah, there was another one about pisseth against the wall. This one was just drink your own piss, which I've never done.
Bear Grylls loves it. I'm going to ask you the next one, which is from Poker, again from our Facebook page. So how did your emotional support change between now and within the AOG, within friends, family, church and such? So let's say, who do you ask about your doubts? Do or did you have people whom you would not mind seeing you cry? I'm asking about the quality or kind of relationships the church environment was building between its members.
Yeah, that's a heavy question. That's a deep question because there's so much to unpack in that. But I have always been the sort of person that had solid friendships and solid relationships. And so when I left the church, when I left Christianity, I left a lot of people behind. And I tell you, there was a gap in my life. But I did a runner. I changed countries, changed jobs, changed countries, just completely did a runner. So I went over into a sort of an expat scene overseas where a lot of people were in the same position where they'd left everything behind and were looking to connect with people. And so I quickly made some really good friends. And it's very different, I think, being back in Australia, for example, because when you step out of church, a lot of people already have their social networks and they have their friendships, and it's very hard to connect. But I think I was lucky then going overseas in an expat community where everybody was a little bit needy for friends. It was actually harder when I came back to Australia to live and trying to reconnect with old friends because people sort of moved on. But my emotional supports in a lot of ways are the same because I have people that I trust who I can talk to. But I don't have that sense of community that we talked about, in that community in the fold episode.
Mm.
That certainly doesn't exist. And I miss that. I miss that
Yep.
dearly. I used to sort of think, it's like being in high school, being in church, and think, I'm so glad to put that away. But there was that sense of community
Yep.
that I really missed. But one other thing I will say is the people that I have in my life now, I trust far more than the people I necessarily had in my church life. Like I wouldn't have gone
Mm.
to pastors and told them about my real struggles and
Yep.
my real concerns or my real battles, because you don't know how they're going to judge you. Whereas I think the relationships I've got now, the people that I really trust, I can tell them almost anything.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think that's also an evolution with your maturity, or is it reflective of the group that you trust?
I think
Yeah.
it's both. But, it was a lot easier to make friends when you were younger than it is
Mm.
now. And so
Yeah.
friendships are more important. And I think we guard them a lot more than we did back then. But in terms of, Poker asked about who do you ask about your doubts?
Yeah.
I don't really ask anyone. I find out for myself now. And I think
Mm.
that's key. I do a lot of reading. Whether it's books or websites or blogs or podcasts or whatever it is, I go and I immerse myself in things and find out. I
Yeah.
don't need to go to an authority as much as I used to. What about you?
Yeah, look, it sort of folds back to Isaac's question in a way. That sense of congregation, the community, is something very much like you. There was a gap when I left, and when I decided to break away from the church space. Like for me, that actually happened around the time I divorced. So it was a sort of a double down in lonely time, because as you know, in divorce, quite often your friends pair off, dependent on which allegiance they want to stick with. I missed that for a long time. It was really difficult. And I'm someone who makes friends really easily. And at that time, I found myself actually turning towards work friends a lot more because it was easier. And I found that sense of community with work. Now, that was quite a few years ago, and I've certainly moved on since then, and I've got a really good established group of very close friends who definitely we check in on each other. We can say anything to each other, and there's no judgment. So I think that's a great place, but it's taken a long time to get there. I found it easier within the church scene, and I think it was something that was quite inherent, and obviously it's dependent on the individual church that you went to and the culture that was developed. But the culture, I think, for most of the places I was at, was a really supportive culture. And I think some of it was, if you're a relatively likable person, you'll be invited into the fold. And it's easy because you could see a lot of people that weren't invited in, and it was harder on them. So there's a lot of personality stuff in there as well. There was a difference for quite a time. That difference is gone now, and maybe I had to learn the skills to be able to develop that outside of the church space, but I've certainly developed those.
Yeah, very good. I mean, we kind of both are telling the story of, it's okay, but doesn't mean it wasn't hard at times. And it also doesn't mean that others haven't faced a real challenge and really miss that. And I think sometimes people go back.
Yeah.
People go back to fundamentalism, Pentecostalism, whatever. They go back because they miss that, and they don't find that in the sort of larger society. And, who's going to judge them for that?
Absolutely. It hurt. It absolutely hurt, knowing that some people didn't really want to associate you. Well, it wasn't the fact that you're excommunicated or anything, but you weren't within their bubble anymore. So it was a bit too much hard work to engage with you because you weren't coming to those common groups together, whether it be a Bible study, whether it be a church meeting, a youth group meeting, or obviously I was a bit old for youth group when I left, but those sort of meetings, unless you're actually coming to those, it's a bit of an effort outside of those. So yeah, difficult time.
Yeah, sure. Hey, I like the next question. This one's cool. The person calls themselves Dork, and they're from Holland. So this is our first international question.
Hello, Dork from Holland.
Yep. And it is, hey, I love your podcast. I feel incredibly understood. Considering you still have friends in the church, how does it feel to see them raise their children within Pentecostalism or Christianity in general? I ask because that is for me personally probably the biggest trigger, seeing Christian friends teach their children the same things that have caused me so much pain and trauma. And then he also says, much love from the Netherlands.
Yeah, I love it. I feel love from the Netherlands. It's fantastic, especially from their little hash cookie cafes.
I'm just going to gloss over the fact that you're on drugs. You know, we've hinted to the fact, or more than hinted, that I had an angry atheist stage. And so I have children. And it was very much conscious for me to say, am I going to raise my kids with a belief in God or not? And it was like, well, at that point in my life, no, I'm not. And so I intentionally moved them right away from any sort of belief in God. They would talk to me about God and I'd say no such thing.
Yep.
I talked to them about the flying spaghetti monster God. I talked to them about the giant teapot between Earth and Mars, and that could be there and God could be next to it. You know, the whole bit. I gave them all that sort of atheist line. And so I raised them very much not believing in God. And then later, when I had my sort of mystical experience, just to confuse them, I went back and told them, oh, by the way, and they sort of, let me know, oh, secretly, we kind of always believed anyway, Dad, it's all good. Watching people raise their kids in fundamentalism, I am so glad that I kept my own kids out of that, even if it was true, because almost every one of them that I know are somehow messed up by it. There's very few that aren't.
Yeah,
and they're reading the books, they're listening to our podcast. There's so much anecdotal evidence to say this is not good for kids.
Yeah, no, very true. Look, I think for me, I didn't really keep contact with too many people that I would be concerned about them raising their kids within Pentecostalism. I had some quite progressive friends, so I think that they were also questioning around that similar time, but there was definitely a few that I didn't keep contact with, but I knew of. One that comes to mind was someone that rang me only probably about 2 years ago, and their adult daughter, probably in her early 20s at that time, was wanting to study the degree that I have. And the degree that I have is quite worldly within church circles. She rang me very concerned that her daughter would be deconverted by taking part in that course and learning different things that wasn't within the constructs of the church. She asked me, and I mean, she knew that I wasn't involved in church anymore. She probably doesn't know what I believe, anything like that, but was really digging away to go, is this going to destroy my daughter? And I was like, well, in my opinion, it won't destroy your daughter. It'll actually empower your daughter to actually ask those questions that she should have been asking, and you as a parent should have been encouraging her to ask a long time ago. I imagine that she still went on to study the course I studied, and I don't know where she's at now. That was probably 2-3 years ago that I had that conversation. But anyone who is within the scene who I would be concerned of bringing up kids, I disassociated from quite a long time ago. But I, like you, T, I would be quite concerned about somebody bringing their kids up in that scene without actually helping them to question along the way and being a little bit more open-minded, I guess.
It seems to me that a lot of the people that go the distance in Pentecostalism were the ones that were born into it. Certainly there are people that convert and stay in it, but I think in terms of our peers, more people are out than in.
Oh, definitely.
So I think there is a place for the indoctrination and the conforming their minds to the image of Christ or whatever it is that they want to say. But it keeps them in there. So I think from a Pentecostal perspective, there's a place for that. But I think standing on the outside, I'm just looking at it going, this is just not good for anyone and certainly not good for the kids. And so I'm really glad I didn't raise my kids in this. I'm really glad I left before I had kids. Because I think, they'd be coming to me and saying, my therapist said, and pointing the finger at me.
Yeah, look, I think that regardless of whether it's Pentecostalism or whether it's any lifestyle that doesn't allow you to look outside and question and try and contextualise in different ways is a dangerous place. And Pentecostalism falls into that for sure.
Yeah.
Now, the next one is I think it's clearly pointed to me. Are your brothers still in church, B? Yeah, one has fallen back into there, wasn't there for quite a while, and a lot of stuff going on in their life. The other one, I think they habitually go. That's it. There's nothing behind it. There's no faith, I guess, driving it. They just go because for 30 odd years it's been habitual, pretty hard to break away from that space. Their family goes, as in their wife, their kids. In short, they both go, but both are in quite different positions. I am going to ask the next one to you, T, and that is from Daniel on Facebook. I do feel like it's a bit of a telethon we're asking. It's like, Daniel from Facebook.
Daniel from Facebook has given $5.
If we read out his name, and I'll read it again, Daniel, you owe us $10. How was leaving the religion handled by those who remained? How were you treated?
Oh, this is season 2. Basically, that's what this one's all about, where we're going to go with season 2. The majority of them didn't take it well. I even had some very dear friends who didn't take it well. And I think that was because, if it hasn't become clear, I really did believe this. I really did live it. You know, I was a leader. I was, in positions of leadership. I lived this Pentecostal Christian faith.
And you're a zealot.
I was very much. And to then turn around and say, no, don't believe it anymore, and leave was, I think, very challenging to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But, coming back to what you said, B, before, I think my divorce was more polarizing than actually leaving the church. So I think more people looked at me divorcing my then wife as a betrayal of God and Jesus and everything, more than just stopping going to church. Because I think a lot of people see you can stop going to church and then go back later on.
Yep.
But divorce is pretty much final, unless you're, Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith, who seem to get married 3 or 4 times. That's pretty much it. And as we know, that's largely in Pentecostalism, at least when we were there, that was the unforgivable sin. Yeah. So I think that was more polarizing. But then, to be honest, those two things were sort of mixed up as well. So a lot of people got quite mean. I remember when I came back from overseas and started reaching out to people, the coldness from a number of them. And some of them actually said to me, "Oh, I'm actually friends with your ex-wife."
Oh, yeah.
And they made it very clear, this is the side I've chosen, so don't call me again, They didn't quite put it like that, but that's pretty much what came across.
They inferred,
yeah, so that was a mix. And again, B, that's another episode to discuss all that. But I think most people couldn't handle it. Very few could. I think some of them, when I adopted a little bit more of a spiritual outlook rather than the angry atheist, even though I wasn't a Christian, some of them were a little bit more welcoming then. I think they were more threatened by the atheism than by leaving.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people have a very fragile faith. I'm not saying everybody does, but I think a lot of people really do, and they really do their best to keep anything that's going to challenge their faith or, break the foundations of their faith. They like to keep it at a distance. And so I don't know if it was always personal, but can I say, God, it felt personal at times.
Oh, absolutely.
What about you?
Well, quite similar. And I think that similar juncture around divorce was sort of, it's a point of no return. Not that, particularly the church I last went to was very accepting of people who were divorced. It wasn't an issue at all. But for me, I think I probably, if I reflect on it, I used it as a time to break away. It had been a long time coming for me. I was one of those people who were habitually going. I had some fantastic connections with people. I had some of the closest friendships that I had had in years. How did it work out? Look, I think there's 2 stages. When I left Great Big AOG, I was reasonably detached from a lot of people, and I think it was convenient for them because I'd left and I'd been accused of being a pew warmer because I was going to a lesser spiritual church, which was a Baptist at the time. The last one I was at was a Church of Christ. A lot more people were very accepting. I still have contact with a lot of people from there, and it's been over 10 years or around 10 years, something like that. I think they were a very different mix of people. Grace was actually lived, and I still get along with those people really well. We still have some fundamental differences. A couple of good friends of mine are ministers, but we have a really respectful conversation with each other. Like, it's not an issue for them that I believe what I believe or don't believe what they believe. We come together, I think, and we connect on a different level, and we have that base of friendship because of it. I wasn't ostracised in the whole, but I was definitely ostracised by many in different areas, and particularly as a result of divorce, of people taking sides. And I cut and run. I left it. I just couldn't be bothered putting the effort in. There was enough emotional turmoil as a result of divorce, and I didn't have the energy to put into those relationships where that was just a little bit too hard, and I never went back to try.
You know what happened for me, though? Even though I was overseas, Facebook came along.
Oh, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I was connected with people, which I think in a different time you would have walked away and never seen them again.
Mm.
With Facebook, all of a sudden we were in each other's face with a book. And so I remember when Facebook first came along, and the confronting of the way that we were in each other's lives, and people were saying things and I was saying things to them. I was thinking, someone's going to write a PhD about this. Quite confronted by seeing these people again in their rejection, which I think in a different time you would never have to have seen them again.
Yeah, true. And you were in your angry atheist stage.
I was, yeah, and happily so. All right, I'm going to read the next one. Are you ready?
We're moving into the anonymous.
We are. This is anonymous from Facebook. In your opinion, does Christianity and Pentecostalism in particular prevent people from growing up properly? I mean, the fact is mostly about conforming to standards of behaviour and avoiding sin and upsetting God, the literalism that constrains people, thinking the way 95% of sermons are about what people should be doing better, the way adults are called children of God or sheep and are always waiting for daddy to intervene and fix them and make their life easier.
Look, I think any social construct, and again, I'll sound like I'm banging on about this, but any social construct that locks itself down and doesn't allow you to look outside it and have reference points outside of that, I think prevents you growing up properly. Pentecostalism absolutely does that. It locks you in. Generally speaking, it's not every Pentecostal church, but certainly my experience has been it locks you into a way of thinking. It locks you into a particular bubble that absolutely you don't grow up properly. You don't learn how to deal with things in an effective way living within broader society. And quite often I think you see that, particularly with kids who've grown up in the church, they don't have another reference point. They go to university and they either freak out or they backslide. They go into another space of kicking their heels up and going, hey, this is a world I haven't seen before, and don't know how to process it. It's really bad, and that's where I think it sits on the edge of cultishness for me. How about you, T?
Yeah, well, I definitely saw that when I came into Great Big AOG after spending a few years in between the Revival Centre and Great Big AOG. I definitely came into Great Big AOG and thought that the kids in the youth group were seemingly, I'm just going to make an arbitrary number, but seemingly 2 to 3 years younger than their peers on the outside. And when I left the Revival Centre and went into, in inverted commas, the world, I wasn't ready. I certainly wasn't ready, even though I'd gone to school and, hung out with friends at school and everything. There had been a lot of the stunting, and I had this warped view. I thought everybody in the world was bad and, doing all these horrible, and so many people don't. So many people are really good people and quite moral and, not lying, stealing, cheating, promiscuous. It just not everybody is at all. And so I wasn't prepared for that. But in answer to the question in terms of adults, 100%. I think any sort of, like you said, any sort of restrictive culture, emotionally or psychologically, is going to hold back growth. It's going to restrict growth. Yeah. And I've seen that in myself. I've seen it in my friends, no doubt. And that's another reason why I say, ultimately, this stuff's not good for you.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's another, just a little quick quiz at the end there. What's your least favourite word in Christianese?
Fornication.
Californication.
No, fornication, because that's what I got kicked out of the revival center for. I'll be okay.
No, you will be. You'll be
Yeah, I
fine.
don't like fornication. Who says that? Hey, baby, can I buy you a beer? Let's go
Let's
fornicate.
fornicate. I mean, it's a great pickup line. It's probably seldom used. Look, for me, I don't know. I hate them all. I hate any jingoistic bloody rubbish.
Fellowship. I remember I was working with someone who was a Christian recently, and they started talking about how they had good fellowship with their family, and I just looked at them and just thought, oh, fuck off. I didn't say it. I just thought it was just like, fuck off. Go and fucking fellowship elsewhere.
In my profession, wisdom is used a lot. So practice wisdom and things like that. And that triggers me sometimes. But I also use it. But sometimes it triggers me.
Yeah, I remember I brought that up with you once when I was in the angry atheist stage, and you said something about wisdom, and I said, "What do you mean, fucking wisdom? Who says wisdom?" Now I'm not so bad with wisdom. I think, especially around the Buddhist tradition, it means a different thing.
It does, and I think my bent was very much about knowledge without wisdom, and how dangerous it was. Because so a lot of people have got a lot of knowledge and they know stuff, but if they don't know how to apply it, well, they're a bit shit. I'm going to ask you the next one, which again is from Anonymous. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and reflections about progressive Christians with a Pentecostal or charismatic heritage who are trying to shape a more holistic, contemplative, caring, life-giving expression of faith and justice. People like, and a few examples, Jonathan Martin, Sarah Bessie, Chris Green, Carlos Rodriguez. I'm going to throw in Rob Bell into that. Liberation theology, biblical scholarship, science, LBGT inclusion, and Christian universalism.
Until you said Rob Bell, my answer to that was going to be, I don't know any of these people. Yeah, and I don't know any of these names.
That's why I threw Rob Bell in.
Yeah, well, so I don't know if Rob Bell was. I mean, he was definitely megachurch, but I don't know if he was Pentecostal.
Yeah,
or charismatic. Sure. Yeah, because he never really talks about that when I listen to his stuff. Look, we say progressive now. I think I said this in another episode. We used to call it liberal, small l liberal, theologically liberal. And so liberals were the devil when we were Pentecostal. Yeah. And then somehow I think that, became a label that people have moved away from. I don't want to be seen as a liberal. So they've sort of, made this term progressive. Yeah. I think it's great. Okay, I really do. I think that sort of stuff, anyone who's, going to hold on to their identity and say, okay, that's fine, but I'm going to reshape this, remake this, I'm going to look for the good. So having not read any of these guys and girls, but seeing that you're saying they're more contemplative, caring, life-giving expression, liberation, biblical scholarship, fantastic. Go for it. 100% on board. And as a matter of fact, I read this kind of stuff sometimes, none of those names, and I draw some value because I still, I existed in that framework for so long that I know the language and I know the expression. So even though I consider myself to more resonate with sort of Judaism or with Buddhism, I still very much draw on progressive Christianity and think there's a lot of value in it.
Yeah, look, I agree. I mean, there's still a few I follow on Facebook and also subscribe to some emails from this guy, Shane Claiborne. I don't know if you've heard of Shane, Tony Campolo, red letter Christian stuff. However, for me, they're certainly not fundy or evangelical. I think they've definitely stepped away from that space. But I really enjoy reading their stuff. I don't agree with it all. Actually, I don't agree with much of it, but the bits I do resonate with, particularly around that social justice stuff. The thing that I see, the thing that first attracted me to the person of Jesus, or the stories of Jesus, were about how he stepped in and he stuck up for people, that he didn't like the establishment, all that sort of stuff. I still resonate with that. I don't resonate with the whole, Jesus is God and stuff like that. That's a different story. But certainly I really enjoy the narrative around that space.
Yeah. The irony is that Jesus was anti-empire. Mm-hmm. It was the empire that strung him up on the cross. And then his religion became the religion of that self-same empire. just a few hundred years later. I mean, that's just amazing. But I like what Rob Bell says about this. Rob Bell really says that, this religion is really anti-imperialism and anti the status quo. If you can rediscover that, then this religion's actually really valuable. But like you, I'm not necessarily going to jump onto deity of Christ or, literal resurrection and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think you need to find value in the story of Jesus or the story of the Old Testament prophets. Their fight the power, liberation theology stuff. I think it's brilliant.
Unless, of course, you're a fundamentalist who says if you don't believe that Christ rose from the dead, you're screwed. We've got a double banger coming up here. Were there positives for you guys that came out of your experiences as teeny bopper fundies? And T, that's your word, teeny bopper fundies. You like definitely coined that phrase.
Yeah, it's like I've said it before. It's like Lady Gaga has the monsters. I wanted us to have teeny bopper fundies, but I'm not saying that to patronise anyone. I'm one of them.
That's all right. Most of us were. So any of that stuff that carries you through to today?
Yeah, well, isn't that what we said is one of our intents for this podcast series, right? Was to make sure that it doesn't just become a negative fest, that we don't just put a complete negative spin on this, that we actually do look at the things that were of value. And I think, some of my ability to network, I think I said in another episode, my ability to speak publicly, if it wasn't for being a teenage fundamentalist, we wouldn't have the fun of making a podcast, would we?
That's right. Silver linings.
Yeah. But I think some of my friendships, some of my relationships with people.
You're talking about me.
I am talking about you, but I'm talking about others as well. So don't go out in the wind. Yeah, there's a lot of really good friendships that I have and people that that I connect with. But for what it's worth, I think I could have had a lot of that without being a teeny bopper fundy. What about you? What are some of the positives?
Oh, look, I think the profession I'm in today, I was led there by my time in the church scene, not so much fundy. It obviously started there and had its roots there, but definitely around, it definitely led me into a helping profession that I'm in today. But I think also, like you, the confidence, the self-belief. I think I've talked about this early back, probably in my conversion story, episode 1, where I spoke about I wasn't a confident, I was a self-doubting person. I came into the Pentecostal scene and it gave me confidence, it gave me self-belief, I had acceptance. So I think that sort of stuff really helped build me as a person, notwithstanding the fact I had to deconstruct that to reconstruct the life I have now after coming out a bit damaged. But that still was a legacy of it, I think, that gave me a good foundation.
Yeah, I think for me too, that whole performance aspect, because in the job that I do now, I work in the corporate sphere and I do a lot of, I actually have evangelist in my title on paper, that I'm trying to steer people towards technology and I'm trying to influence people, and there's that whole performance side of it that I think I had a natural skill in that, but I think that the whole Pentecostal scene gave me a place to really practice that and hone those skills. So I think that's something that certainly came out of it.
The second part of that question from Anon, any recommendations around unpacking and processing out of the anger and feelings of betrayal that come up during defunding, or if either of you went through those feelings, what helped you personally?
Yeah, look, I spoke about that a moment ago in saying that you can't stay there for too long. I think if I could go back and process this again, I would speak to myself and say, don't stay too long. Don't stay too long in the negativity, because I did.
Yeah.
That being said, I read a lot. I consumed a lot. I read the whole, Daniel Dennett stuff and, the God Delusion and Sam Harris, all those kind of folks. I read a lot of that sort of angry atheist stuff, and it was really good, I've got to say, because it helped me break it down. It helped me just get rid of it all and then, like you said, rebuild later on. But again, I think emotionally it would have been good to have someone that was skilled in people leaving fundamentalism and them guiding me and saying, okay, that's true, but what about the positive side? No one was coming to me and saying that, because we talk about angry atheists, as a stereotype, because a lot of atheists are, and a lot of atheists are ex-fundamentalists.
Yeah.
So I think destroying that picture of God was important because it set me free to then start to think for myself. But again, I said this 9 times, but I'll say it one more time. You just can't stay there for too long, because if you
No.
do, you suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. Just perpetuating the damage.
What about you?
Yeah, look, I think having people to talk to, I mean, it's a no-brainer, having people help you process it. But I'm also a firm believer that I think we often have the answers within ourselves. We know the answers, and sometimes we need assistance to draw it out. So, the things that we need to go forward, they're there. But we need some assistance, whether that is going to a counsellor, whether it's going to a psychologist. You can go to your GP and get a mental health plan. And if you get a good psychologist, you're not much out of pocket per session. Go and start to unpack it a bit. But go to one that perhaps practices something like narrative therapy that can help you to actually rebuild it and refocus, rather than unpacking it to such a point that you have no idea where to take it from there and you're dependent on them to actually reconstruct it. Don't do that. Connect with people that you know who have left. Connect with people on this Facebook page. A lot of people here, I think, have left and have dealt with that. Reach out, talk, be honest. Be honest with yourself also, but also don't be hard on yourself. If there's stuff that you haven't worked out yet, give yourself time. Here I am, many, many years on. I still haven't worked it out. I probably never will work it out. I'll die before that ever happens. Don't be hard on yourself. Life is a journey. As tokenistic and ridiculous as that sounds, stick with it. Journey along.
The thing to be about fundamentalism, and this is where it becomes very cultic as well, is it can be a prison of the mind.
Mm.
And, you may be very smart, you may be very compassionate, you may be a really good person, but if there's been a maze built in your mind that won't let you out, I think, for me, as someone that is quite cerebral and likes to read, I just consumed a lot of stuff. But ultimately, I did need someone to act as a guide, to say, hey, you need to put this down, or hey, you need to, investigate cognitive behavioral therapy, or hey, you need to meditate and do some loving kindness meditation and just be positive. And eventually that came. But I think, in answer to the question, that CBT/Buddhism stuff is really, really good for staying positive whilst focusing on the negative, because you do need to focus on it while you process it. So I would suggest CBT, and I would suggest, I'm not putting this forward as a religion, I'm saying secular Buddhism. A lot of the Buddhist practice and resilience training and that kind of thing is really good. That positive psychology, I think, is really key.
Yeah. Yeah. No, good tips. Good tips.
All right, I'll read the next one, hey?
Yeah, why not?
So this is Isaac, and Isaac is on Facebook, and he says, I've been coming out of fundamentalism for a few years now, still associated with a church, but the input from there into my spiritual life is almost zero. I'm feeling out what it means to follow Christ, free from the constructs of organised congregational Christianity. I would appreciate your speculation around this question or your experiences, if either of you still consider Jesus to be the Christ.
Oh, some of this is a season tour, isn't it, really, about where we've got to. However, whether Jesus is the Christ, look, I've mentioned this before, no. The reality is, I think those constructs, whatever you're doing going forward, I read a good book, I can't actually remember the name of it, but it was talking about Christianity in the United States and how most of the people who identified as Christians weren't involved in the church at all. Like, it was 70%. It was a huge, huge stat. If that is what works for you and you want to explore the teachings of Christ within that space, without that organised congregational Christianity, as you say, then go for it. See what that means. Explore it. Contextualise it in the world around you rather than contextualising it within the walls of the church and an organised religion. See how it resonates. Give it a crack. I mean, if it's not working for you and you're in that church and in fundamentalism with zero feedback, I don't know, ask yourself, why are you there? Are you there because of the social aspect? Are you there because you've got familial pressures to remain there? Explore that stuff first, and then as you do that, step out, try different things. Don't judge yourself. Don't let others judge you. Fuck them. You've got to be able to be free to move forward and explore and ask questions. And if people stop you from asking questions, then I don't know, look at the value of them being in your life, because real friends, real people who are supportive will support you to ask questions and not judge the space that you're moving within. And it doesn't really matter if you believe different things to them, because we're not all the same. Rant over. How
Yeah.
about you two?
Well, we talked before about progressive Christians and liberal Christians. There was an older guy named Marcus Borg who was then a liberal. Today would be called a progressive, I'm sure. But he talked about Jesus being a spirit person, and that there have been numerous spirit people throughout history, and some stand out more than others. We've got, some of the Old Testament prophets would be spirit people. We've got, the Buddha. We've got, Jesus. Others. There would be numerous people that would be considered spirit people, and I think in that sense, Jesus was the Christ.
Yeah.
In the sense that he was a spirit person, and that he was a person for his time, and that his words echo on, resonate on well beyond his life. So in that sense, I think I would accept that. But is he the fulfillment of Jewish Messiah and, Savior of the universe and all that kind of stuff? But I will say that if you want to keep Christianity as a framework, you're not quite ready to step out of that, then a couple of people that I would recommend that you read and that you explore one would be Richard Rohr, who is a Catholic priest. He does the Center for Action and Contemplation as well as his organization. I would suggest that you jump into him. Another one would be Rob Bell, who is much more megachurch, isn't he? Evangelical kind of stuff. So I would, and still a Christian, so I would jump into him. And the other one, I would think, if you're really feeling like you really want to sort of get out there and get your boundaries tested, would be to jump into the Liturgists podcast. So that's the Liturgists. Jump into them because they deconstruct and reconstruct, and they've decided to hold on to Christianity as their framework. And some of them would believe in a literal resurrection and some don't, and they're still fellowshipping. There's that word. But that's what I would say to do.
Yeah.
And I would not discourage you from holding on to your Christian framework if it works for you. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to tear anyone away from their beliefs or from their faith in Jesus. But we went a different way, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right. Look, some of as I've said before, I still have many dear Christian friends and a couple that are ministers, and I value them as people and they value me as a person. There is no issue with that whatsoever. So please pursue what works for you. I'm going to ask you the next one too. We're down to our last three questions. There has been a few, so thank you. It's a long podcast, extended play for people.
Yeah, extended episode, isn't it?
Absolutely. But you asked for it. You asked us questions. We're going to answer them. So I've silenced my involvement in the AOG cult for years. Alienated family and friends with my zeal. Still feel like decisions made then have a detrimental effect on my children who are now adults. How do I get past this when you don't even talk about it? Still feel shame about falling for such bullshit. You've said BS, I say bullshit. And haven't even started on my experiences in the church.
Okay, I don't know if that's a question, but I will respond to it.
Yes.
And my response to that is very much what we've been talking about today. Set yourself free, be gentle with yourself, start to explore other ideas. You even talked about the impact that it's had on your children. We can't undo that, but maybe have some conversations with your kids, about, hey, I used to do this, I used to believe this, here's what I'm thinking now. Just be really honest and open with them because, our brains, the neuroplasticity of our brains, we're all still learning, we're all still changing. It's not too late. We just can't go backwards in time.
Speak for yourself.
Keep listening to the podcast, not because we need your numbers, but because I think, it's obviously resonating with you. Get involved in the discussion group and read. That's what I found to be really important, is to read. But remember I said about that positive psychology stuff. Look for ways to draw the positive out of it and to move forward. Don't be stuck in regret.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I mean, I obviously relate to this. I've spoken many times where I have always found it very difficult to speak about my faith. So it's a bit different. I didn't alienate people with my zeal. I just, I didn't really witness to them or hit them up. But I always felt ashamed about speaking about the fact I was involved in this Pentecostalism because I found it a little bit weird, even being in there and being part of it. And I think, when I reflect, I know that from the outsiders, people looking in would have gone, what the hell are you involved with? And I found that a little bit difficult to handle. But as T said, go easy on yourself. Feeling shame, I mean, that's something that others can bring upon you, but I think quite often we bring upon ourselves. So we've got to be graceful, extend grace to ourselves. And I don't say that in a Christianese way, but grace is a great thing which we can extend, grace and forgiveness. It's a very, very, very powerful tool. Forgive yourself, forgive others, and find a way to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's really key, B. It's forgiveness and forgiving the people that hurt you, forgiving the churches. It doesn't mean you're saying it's okay, and wishing them well is I think really key to healing.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you can get there. If you can't get there right away, it's okay.
Yeah, that's right. And talk to others. If you're a talker, talk. If you're a reader, read. If you're a meditator, meditate. Whatever helps you.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is from Sean on Facebook, and he says, this is a deep one. Do you think the manipulation of behaviours through guilt and shame was malicious or ignorant?
Look, I think it was both. I think there were some people that absolutely used manipulative tools to control people and loved the recognition of that, the control that they were able to have over people. But I think in large, I would like to think that most people were ignorant and that they were actually brought up within a culture that was normalized, and that's what you did, and that's how you actually operated. I think you do see people, televangelists and such, that I think, a lot of that is absolutely pure manipulation and bloody evil. But I think the vast majority of people that the circles I moved within, it was ignorance. And I think a lot of those people would actually look back on that time and recognise the ignorance that they displayed at the time. How about you, T?
Yeah, I think some of them would. Some of them would look back, maybe even most of them, but certainly not all of them. It's not black and white. You can't look at it and go, were they malicious or were they ignorant? I think sometimes it was a combination of both. I think, it's sometimes in exactly the same situation, someone could be operating out of a degree of ignorance and a degree of malice. By and large, it was a system. We were conditioned by the system. And the reason I say that with some air of confidence is because if I can't believe that of others, how can I believe that of myself?
Mm.
Because the stuff that I did, I've mentioned, I wrote letters to people and said, I'm sorry for, there was something in me niggling that's saying maybe this isn't the right thing to do at the time. But the system said this is what you do, and so you sort of went along with it. So I think, part of our desire to say, not to use people's names when we're disparaging them, instead we just call them pastor this and pastor that, intentionally doing that like we do in the podcast is because, to quote scripture, the measure you use will be the measure you used against you. Sorry if I triggered anyone then. And so if you're going to use that measure against other people, then you've got to use it against yourself. And if you want to be forgiven by yourself and forgiven by others, forgive them too. I think it's a combination of both, but I think it all needs forgiveness. That said, if someone is still continuing in that behaviour, then they need to be called out.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think we've admitted on more than one occasion through the last 19 episodes that we have used manipulative behaviours before as well. So we've intentionally done it, but I think it was very, very much a minority. But it does happen. I think this is the last question from Kerry. Yeah. So there seems to be a culture within many ACC churches, the Australian Christian churches, where ministers have to attend so many church meetings that their family life suffers, that this is expected and many people's marriages break up. Do either of you have any thoughts on this as ministers in training? Now, I'd like to say that I was a minister in training. You were an actual minister.
No, actually, I was still a minister in training because my certification, I can't remember the actual term they used, never actually came through. It was put in, it was being processed, and then I withdrew it. So technically, I was never actually a minister. I too was a minister in training. I can remember when I went to the Every Believer Evangelism course run by Tony Van Brown, he actually said, I can't remember the actual joke, and maybe AVB, you can put it in the chat, but you said something about becoming a Pentecostalism and not having becoming a Pentecostal and not having any time because it takes up all your life. I saw a lot of that the ministers were doing 9 to 5, and then they were out for night meetings and home groups and all this, and youth and this and that. And, you and I did it as well, B. We were,
Yeah.
busy all the time. And that must put a massive impact, a massive stress on families. And in fact, we know that it does. I can't speak to marriages that are broken up. I know that there have been a couple, but I can't speak to why that happened because I was never privy to the inner workings. I would suggest that it's probably deeper than just the time and attention that people are or aren't giving to each other. I think that there's probably a lot of stuff going on that the system is not good for honesty in relationships and intimacy and that kind of thing. So I think it's probably a lot deeper than that, but I definitely think it's a factor in breaking people down and breaking people up.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably the superficiality of the response that people quite often get when they're struggling too. It was like, oh, I'll pray for you, brother or sister. That's what you'd get rather than a true support. So if someone said, oh, God, my life is falling over because I just haven't got time for everything, it was usually the answer was to pray for someone. I think, I saw over and over again, there's a really poor management by the church of a work-life balance of any of the ministers. There was an expectation, but I think there was also probably the flip side of that was they enjoyed the recognition as well. There was a high importance, particularly in large Pentecostal churches, that you were seen. It was evident that you were at this and you were at that. You got recognition for it. And you were definitely put up on a pedestal, and literally at Great Big AOG, you were on a pedestal on the stage quite often. So I think they need to get better at that. Organisations, secular organisations, community organisations that treat their staff that way, don't keep their staff. I work for a big organisation that if they don't provide a work-life balance, they lose people and people move on to where there is a work-life balance. I think that's harder within a church because it's the deeper purpose that it provides when you are a minister. You can't just move on and go, oh, I'll just get another job, because a lot of the time it's all they've ever known, and that's their identity, their core identity. So leaving that behind isn't an option. So you just keep pushing on and on and on. And I think a lot of partners are long-suffering partners that just accept the fact that they're going to have absentee husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, whatever, as a result of the greater sacrifice of ministry. And I think that is really, really poor form to allow that to happen. And I would hope that that's getting better. I don't know if it is, but I would hope that within the scene it's getting better.
Yeah, I think, look, that's the carrot was, the status and being put on the pedestal. But I think the flip side of that, the stick, is the guilt. There would have been a lot of guilt as well. Oh, brother, you're serving the Lord and this is what the Lord expects. When who decides that, right?
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you everyone for all those questions. I mean, there was lots there. I think there was 13 or 15 questions or something, and I enjoyed having a chat. We didn't come into it again. This seems like a theme for us. We didn't come in with a plan. We just thought we're just going to chat to them and talk about what we thought about a lot of them. But it was enjoyable just to have a bit of a look. You might want to reflect a little bit on it.
Yeah, well, I guess I just want to say thank you to everyone that's been a part of this journey so far of season 1, because we've really enjoyed doing this, and we've really enjoyed the fact that you're even tuning in and listening, which is great. We plan to take probably about a month off. We will certainly announce a few weeks in advance when we're coming back, but it'll be at least a month, maybe a little bit more, and then we're going to come back with season 2. And so for season 2, B?
Yeah, so look, season 2, I think we're going to, we'll mix it up. We'll do a few things different. We haven't determined exactly what the format will look like, but we're certainly excited about bringing a few more guests in. I mean, it was fantastic to have Anthony Van Brown in for 3 episodes, but we've got a few more coming up, and some that I'm really excited about. One that I have loved, I have absolutely loved Tara Jean Stephen, who is she presents the Heaven Bent. There's 2 seasons of it, I think, isn't there, T? And one's been on Toronto Blessing and one's been about Bethel Church. And I found it fascinating. It's just been a window into the world, which, because I left Great Big AOG around the time that Toronto was sort of blowing out, it was something that I ignored and missed. So it's fascinating. Are you excited about that one?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, her podcast is really slick and really nice, and I'm really looking forward to her coming on and talking about what she where she's come from, because she grew up as a teenage fundamentalist herself, but also her journey around, lifting the lid on Toronto Blessing and lifting the lid on Bethel. I think she's been very fair with both of them. You don't walk away going, oh, this was all shit. You actually walk away going, okay, there was some good in this and some bad in this. And I think that's where we resonate, because that's what we try and do as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. The other person I'm looking forward to that we've got lined up is Tanya Levin, who wrote the book on Hillsong, People in Glass Houses. She's also been a member of our Facebook group. So I'm really looking forward to getting her in and talking with her about, her journey inside what later became Hillsong, was then, Hills Christian Life Centre, but also the writing of her book and where that whole thing has taken her, because she's become sort of a spokesperson, an icon for this, people that have left Hillsong. So we've definitely got some guests lined up and some other people that we would love to get on. We can't name them yet because we haven't booked them, but that would be really, really cool. Of course, we're going to keep weaving our own stories in there as well, talk about, our own journeys and, the good and the bad in that. And I think, B, you'd agree that we're going to still talk a little bit more about being inside Great Big AOG and inside Pentecostalism, but then we're going to start to move into the leaving. So that's where we're going to go with season 2. So if you're waiting for us to tell you about, why we left, how we left, what happened, definitely going to be coming up in season 2.
Yeah, and look, I think for both, it was an incredibly long journey. Like, it wasn't something that we woke up overnight and went, oh, it's Tuesday, it's time to leave the Penty scene. It was something, there was a lot of influences that happened over a number of years. So it certainly won't be summed up in 1, 2, or 3 episodes, that's for sure. And it'll probably be peppered through a lot of the themes as we weave through season 2.
Excellent end of season 1. The ultimate episode is done.
So it's the end. It is the end of the season. We are finished. We are wrapping up. We're excited about a break, but also excited about coming back. For now, T, it is farewell. To you listeners, it is farewell, but it's not goodbye.
Indeed. And can I also suggest that everyone remember to get vaccinated and stay safe, and we'll see you in a month and a bit.
See you then.